Brenna Colt was just a fired trauma nurse trying to disappear quietly until she saved a collapsing stranger at gate 47. She didn't know it was Shaquille O'Neal, and she definitely didn't know someone wanted him silent. Now her act of empathy has unlocked a buried conspiracy no one dares name. They thought she was just passing through, but this stranger just changed the game. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The day Brenna Colt lost her job didn't start with chaos. It ended with the hospital hallway still smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee when the overhead intercom crackled, calling a code black in the East Wing. It was an elderly black man, unnamed at the time, wheeled in with labored breath and cardiac irregularities. His paperwork misplaced in the system. He didn't have an ID, no insurance, no next of kin on file. The attending physician paused. Protocol was clear, limited intervention until verification. But Brenna moved. She didn't ask permission. She saw the signs: pre-cardiac arrest, oxygen dropping. She grabbed the crash cart before the team even looked up from their tablets. Chest compressions, oxygen tube, epinephrine. She worked fast, hands sure, eyes sharp. It wasn't about rules. It was about time. When the man's pulse returned, it should have been a win. It should have been a moment where someone clapped her on the back and said, "Good save, Colt." But instead, the room stayed quiet. No one met her eyes. She stood there, her patient stable, and still alone. Within the hour, HR called. Security waited at the staff lounge. The director didn't even say her name when he entered. "Brenna, this isn't personal. It's about liability. You overstepped your role." Overstepped. She saved a life, and they called it overstepping. She wanted to scream, wanted to ask why the phrase "do no harm" was printed on the hospital walls, if it only applied to those who filled out their forms correctly. Instead, she stayed silent. She just stared at the badge clipped to her uniform. 14 years of service, and unhooked it slowly. Her locker was emptied in minutes. One small box, a worn stethoscope, a faded photo of her younger self on graduation day, a thank you card from a mother whose baby Brenna had saved, and a brass nurse's pin she used to wear like armor. Now it felt like evidence. She tucked it into her coat pocket like it might still mean something. The air outside hit like a slap, cold, gray, and unforgiving. Her car was parked 3 levels down in the hospital's garage. She walked every step with her jaw locked tight, not from anger, but to keep from breaking down. The drive home was longer than usual, and she barely noticed the static on the radio. Atlanta traffic blurred into noise. She passed familiar exits, wondering if the city she once loved even recognized her anymore. When she finally reached her apartment, it felt too quiet. The living room hadn't changed since last night, but she had. The rug still curled at the corner. The picture frame still hung slightly crooked, but everything felt off, because everything was off now. She dropped the box on the kitchen table and sat in silence. Her phone buzzed with a message from her sister. "When are you finally coming to see us?" That invite had been open for months. Brenna had never taken it. She hated showing up anywhere empty-handed, especially now, with no job, no plan, and barely a pulse of her own. Her phone lit up again. A voicemail. From the hospital board. Final confirmation of her termination. It didn't matter what came after. She deleted it before it finished. For dinner, she didn't cook. Just poured a glass of whatever wine was closest, and stared out the window. Somewhere outside, a siren wailed, then faded. She didn't flinch. After 14 years in trauma, most sounds barely registered. She thought about the man she saved. No one told her his name. He was stable when she left. Was he still alive? Did anyone call his family? Would he even remember her? She doubted it, but she remembered him. The way his chest struggled. The desperation in his half-lidded eyes. The way no one moved until she did. That moment would play in her head again, and again, long after this night was over. Not as guilt, but as proof. She did the right thing. That was all she had left. The right thing. And yet here she was, jobless, disgraced, and invisible. The hospital would go on. Protocols would stay in place. People would keep walking past patients in the name of policy. And Brenna Colt would be just another cautionary tale in whispered staff meeting. She stood at the window for a long time, watching planes in the sky blink like stars. Some headed west, some east. She wondered where they were going. If the people on board were escaping something too, maybe her sister was right. Maybe it was time to disappear for a while. Regroup. Rest. She hadn't done that in years. Not since the divorce. Not since her father passed. Maybe Atlanta wasn't so far after all. As she packed a small suitcase that night, she didn't plan to chase redemption. She just wanted airspace from a world that punished the good and praised the careful. She folded scrubs she might never wear again. Placed her nurse's pin gently on top, like it still mattered, like she still mattered. And in the quiet hum of her apartment, she whispered the words no one let her say. Some people are fired for mistakes. I got fired for refusing to watch someone die. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this wasn't the end of her story. It was just where it started to matter. Hartsfield-Jackson was loud that day. The kind of loud that crawled under your skin. Kids crying over missed snacks, intercoms, echoing final boarding calls. Business travelers barking into earbuds. It was early afternoon, but the airport felt like midnight, its energy burnt out and anxious. Brenna Colt stood near the flight schedule screen in Terminal C, watching a row of delayed flights blink yellow like traffic lights refusing to turn green. Atlanta to San Diego, delayed. Atlanta to Baltimore, delayed. Her flight to Richmond wasn't even posted yet. She adjusted the strap of her duffel bag and moved toward Gate 47. Not because it was hers, but because the seats were mostly empty. She didn't want conversation. She didn't want eye contact. She wanted to disappear into the hum of transit, float like one of those anonymous faces in a crowd. Her hands still smelled faintly of hospital-grade sanitizer, and she wasn't sure if it was comforting or nauseating. There was something sterile about airports that reminded her too much of hospitals. Everyone either waiting, rushing, or recovering. Except here, people weren't dying. At least, that's what she thought. She found a seat 2 rows from the charging station and dropped into it. Her phone had 12% battery. She didn't care. She wasn't planning to answer anyone. Anyway, she leaned her head back, closed her eyes, and tried to shut the world out. But the world had other plans. Somewhere behind her, a strange noise sliced through the background chaos. It wasn't loud. It was wrong. A kind of shallow, rattling breath that no human being makes unless something's failing inside them. Brenna's eyes snapped open. She turned her head slightly, scanning behind her. Most people were buried in their screens or headphones. But then she saw him. A huge man, massive even by athlete standards, hunched near a support column, slumped low into the armchair like gravity was dragging him down in real time. His hood was up, sunglasses on, but his chest heaved irregularly. His hands gripped the sides of the seat as if trying to stay upright. Sweat glistened on his forehead, even though the AC in the terminal was cranked. She didn't know his name. She didn't need to. Something about how he was leaning, the way his shoulders shook, screamed distress. People passed by without noticing. Some glanced at him and looked away, assuming he was hungover or asleep. But Brenna had seen that look before. That was oxygen depletion. That was someone on the edge of cardiac compromise. She stood up, almost involuntarily. Her bag hit the floor with a thud. She walked toward him fast, not running. Running drew attention, but with purpose. A woman nearby gave her a strange look. Brenna ignored her. "Sir," she said, low enough not to alarm him. "Are you all right?" He tried to respond, but only a raspy wheeze came out. His lips were pale. That was the second confirmation. She dropped to her knees beside him and gently pulled his sunglasses off. Pupils dilated, skin tone graying under his beard. Something systemic. "Can you hear me? I'm a nurse." Still no words, just a sluggish nod. Brenna reached into her duffel, pulling out the emergency med kit she always carried. Not standard airport protocol, but old habits died hard. She grabbed a portable pulse oximeter and clipped it to his finger. 84%. Too low. She unzipped a bottle of aspirin and offered 2 pills. "Chew these, now." He complied, his jaw slow and uneven. Brenna kept her voice calm, steady. She signaled to a passing gate agent. "Medical emergency. Get airport EMS. Now." The agent froze, clearly untrained. Brenna raised her voice just enough. "Now please. Gate 4. As the agent sprinted off, a small crowd began to form. Phones came out. Of course they did. Someone started recording. Brenna ignored it all. Her focus was on the man's breath, slowing now, more labored than before. She took his wrist. Pulse was thready. A cold sheen spread over his forehead. She looked him straight in the eye. "Stay with me, all right?" Deep breaths. His lips parted slightly. For a second he looked like he was trying to speak. Then came a whisper, barely audible. "I owe you more than you know." It caught her off guard, not just the words, but the way he said them. Like a secret. Like something meant only for her. Before she could respond, the EMTs arrived. 2 of them, wheeling a crash bag and a stretcher. They didn't ask many questions. They saw the vitals, saw her nursing badge hanging from the strap of her duffel, and trusted she knew what she was doing. "We'll take it from here," one of them said. She nodded, stepping back. Her knees cracked as she stood. A small group of travelers clapped lightly, unsure of what else to do. The man was hoisted onto the stretcher. The oxygen mask went on. As they rolled him away, he reached out just a little. A slow hand lift, fingers curling in a barely there wave. Then he was gone. The crowd thinned. Life resumed. Flights were called. Screens updated. But Brenna stood frozen, watching the direction the stretcher had gone, trying to process what just happened. A gate attendant approached her, his face apologetic. "Ma'am, we're gonna upgrade your seat. Just as a thank you." She nodded vaguely, not really listening. Her mind was still stuck on those words. "I owe you more than you know." She sat down again, back in the seat she'd abandoned. The adrenaline began to wear off. Her hands shook slightly. She opened her phone. 5% battery. Still no notifications she cared about. She stared at the terminal clock. It was 3. She still didn't know his name. She had no idea that she'd just saved Shaquille O'Neal. The Shaquille O'Neal. She had no idea. She'd just stepped into something far bigger than a medical emergency. That she'd become a variable in a high-stakes game already in motion. She had no clue that someone was watching her now, not from the crowd, but from higher up, eyes that didn't appreciate interference. Eyes that had expected him to collapse quietly. All she knew was that for the first time since she was fired, she'd done something that felt right. But sometimes, doing the right thing comes with a cost you never saw coming. The moment they wheeled the man away, Brenna thought it was over. A life saved. A crisis past. That's what she told herself as she sat back down in the airport terminal, still catching her breath from the adrenaline crash. But as the terminal returned to its mechanical rhythm, boarding calls, suitcase wheels, and murmured conversations, she sensed something off. Not in the way the crowd thinned, but in how a few people stayed, too still, too quiet, watching. Not passengers, not staff. 2 men in pressed charcoal suits moved in through gate 47, like wind slipping through cracks. No commotion, no warning. Not TSA, private security, slick and silent. They didn't speak to her, didn't even look at her at first. Instead, they moved directly to where the man had been sitting, scanned the area, then nodded toward the direction the EMTs had taken him. One murmured something into a mic, clipped near his collar. Then, without breaking pace, they walked back through a door near baggage handling, one most civilians didn't know existed, tinted, badge locked, unmarked. The normalness of the airport buzzed on around them. People kept boarding flights, sipping coffee, scrolling their screens. But Brenna's stomach was tight, her instincts flaring again. She'd seen men like that only once before when a senator collapsed during a gala, and the event staff made sure the cameras turned off before EMS arrived. Whoever that man was, he wasn't just anyone. And whoever was protecting him, they weren't here for show. Nearly 2 hours passed. Brenna sat in silence, pretending to scroll through her phone, pretending not to notice the same suited men reappear once, then vanish again behind security glass. Her flight was delayed, again, but she didn't mind. Something had shifted. She couldn't explain it, but something in her gut told her this wasn't done. At 5:19 p.m., the airport intercom crackled above her head. "Ms. Brenna Colt, please report to Lounge 6B. You are requested by a private guest." The announcement echoed through the terminal. A few heads turned. Brenna blinked at the sound of her name, heart skipping. She'd never heard it broadcast like that before. Lounge 6B wasn't on the main map. In fact, she wasn't even sure it existed. Her boarding pass didn't mention it, and no gate agent had ever said the name. She gathered her bag and stood slowly. Her palms were damp. She walked past gates, C42 through C49, before seeing a uniformed attendant near an unmarked corridor. "Miss Colt?" the woman asked. Brenna nodded. "This way." The hallway behind the door was eerily quiet, lit with soft white LEDs. It wasn't an airline lounge, not for business class or VIPs. It felt like something more exclusive, more protected, a private enclave carved out behind the noise of the airport, reserved for people whose names came with NDAs and armored transport. The attendant opened a final door, revealing a lounge space far too elegant for a terminal. Leather furniture, framed photos of sports legends and civil rights icons, a stocked bar that no one touched. And there, seated in the corner, no hood, no sunglasses, just him. Shaquille O'Neal. Brenna froze. She had seen his face before, of course on commercials, billboards, sneaker ads, meme compilations, but none of that prepared her for the reality. Not because he was famous, but because of how real he looked now. Vulnerable, heavy with something far beyond physical size. He looked up. Their eyes met. "You came," he said simply. She stepped forward, slowly, cautious but drawn. "They said you requested me." "I did." He gestured to the seat across from him. She sat, unsure of the rules in a situation like this. "You didn't know who I was, did you?" he asked, more curiosity than ego. "I had no idea," she admitted. "You looked human, sick." His chuckle was low, brief. "That's because I was. Still am." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. His voice dropped to something colder, tighter. "You didn't just save me from passing out on a floor. You stepped between me and something darker, something that's been closing in for a while now." Brenna furrowed her brow. "What do you mean?" Shaq exhaled, leaned back. "The moment I collapsed wasn't just random. It was planned. A setup. Maybe something slipped in my drink earlier. Maybe airborne. I'm still waiting on labs, but it wasn't natural. I felt stress. This was different, like someone wanted to knock me out without leaving a mark." "Why?" she asked. Not out of disbelief, but alarm. "Because I've been talking too loud lately," he said. "Calling out people who don't like being seen. Sponsors. Owners. Silent partners. I've been speaking on race, money, power. Some circles don't like that. Especially when I say it on live television. Especially when I don't take their checks to shut up." Brenna's spine stiffened. "And the people who should be protecting you, some of them are clean. Some I don't know. Which is why I didn't want TSA. Didn't want the hospital. You," he pointed gently. "You weren't part of any system. You had no reason to lie. No agenda. That makes you dangerous to the wrong people." She tried to keep her voice calm, but her thoughts were racing. "So what happens now? Why bring me here?" "Because you're part of this now. Whether you like it or not, you didn't ask to be. I get that, but the moment you knelt beside me, you made a choice. And so did they. If they wanted me gone, they saw you stop it." Her throat tightened. "You think they'll come after me?" "I think they'll watch you. I think they already are." Silence stretched between them. The lounge door remained closed. No sound from the corridor. Brenna stared at her hands. "I'm not a reporter. I'm not a spy. I'm just a nurse who did what felt right." Shaq nodded slowly. "And that's exactly why they'll fear you more than anyone with a press badge." She didn't know how to respond. Her mind swirled with questions. Why hadn't she recognized him? Why was it her, out of everyone in that airport, who moved? Was it instinct, destiny, or just bad timing? Shaq stood up and walked to a small table, where a manila envelope lay. He handed it to her. "I don't expect you to read this now, but when you do, you'll see names, patterns, pieces of something bigger. This isn't just about me. It's about a lot of voices getting quiet for all the wrong reasons." She took the envelope. It was thicker than expected. "If you walk away from this, I'll understand," he said. "But if you don't, just know, this goes deeper than anyone thinks." Brenna looked up at him, pulse quickening. What if the truth is too much? His eyes didn't flinch. Then it means it was worth telling. And in that moment, Brenna Colt realized she hadn't saved a celebrity. She'd intercepted a secret meant to stay buried. Brenna sat with the envelope still resting on her lap, fingers brushing the sealed edge like it was something radioactive. The air in the private lounge was still, heavy. She wasn't sure if it was the tension or the weight of what she'd just heard, but she could feel her heart pushing against her ribs like it was trying to climb out of her chest. Shaquille O'Neal, still the towering presence that had once ruled courts and commercials alike, didn't speak for a moment. He just leaned against the armrest of the couch, elbows on knees, staring at the floor as if there were something down there trying to rise up too. "I didn't want it to be you," he said quietly. like he was admitting something he'd avoided for weeks. Didn't want someone else dragged in. Brenna didn't answer. She waited, the way she used to wait in trauma wards for the patient's real vitals to show themselves after the adrenaline faded. He looked up finally. It started slow. Anonymous notes. Quiet meetings that didn't feel right. Phone calls with too much silence on the other end. I knew what it was. I'd poked something too real. Brenna kept her voice level. What did you say? Shaq let out a breath. I said the truth. That billion-dollar sports sponsors care more about branding than justice. That they're willing to back players until those players speak on race. Then suddenly they're bad for business. I said too many players are told to play ball, cash checks, and keep their heads down even when their communities are burning. His jaw tensed. I wasn't subtle about it. Said it live. Said it loud. Then came the silence. Not the kind that means they're done. The kind that means they're circling. Brenna swallowed. You think someone inside your circle's helping them? I don't think, he said, voice edged. I know. He stood and walked to the window. The airport tarmac stretched behind him in washed out light. Planes rolling calmly in the distance. Everything looked normal, but nothing about this moment was. I've seen the signs, he continued. A car that followed too long. A business partner who suddenly stopped returning calls. My security team, half of them still with me, the other half acting different. Like they're waiting for something. Or maybe they already got paid not to stop it. He turned back to her. You didn't just jump in back there. You became unpredictable. You weren't part of the script. I wasn't trying to be, she replied evenly. I saw someone struggling to breathe. That's what I do. He nodded slowly. Exactly. That's what they didn't plan for. Brenna felt the unease spreading through her chest. Not fear. Something deeper. Like she was being woven into a puzzle she never agreed to touch. Why not go to the police? Shaq gave a small, humorless smile. You think I can walk into a station and say, hey, I think I'm being poisoned because I spoke on race and billionaires didn't like it. They'd send a press release before they filed a report. She frowned. You're Shaquille O'Neal. They'd listen. I'm a black man who speaks too freely about power. They'd hear. They wouldn't listen. There's a difference. The truth of it settled hard. Brenna had seen it too, in ER beds and waiting rooms. The quiet deferral, the judgment that floated just behind the eyes of doctors who didn't recognize what was urgent unless it bled. The unspoken ranking of whose lives were emergencies and whose were complications. Shaq sat back down and leaned forward again, elbows resting on his knees. His voice dropped, lower than before. I don't trust anyone who gets a check to be quiet. It was more than a statement. It was a fracture. A truth cracked open across the room. He wasn't just talking about security. He was talking about the world he came from. The world that celebrated him when he signed deals, cheered him when he played, but shifted when he asked why certain people never got those deals too. When he refused to be a commodity. When he refused to be polite. Brenna's response came before she had a chance to second-guess it. Good, she said, matching his gaze. I don't get paid anymore. There was silence, but not the awkward kind. The kind that built something invisible between two people who suddenly understood what they'd each lost. And what they might still stand for. Shaq's expression changed. Not relief. Not a smile. But something like respect. Or maybe recognition. I don't want you in the middle of this, he said, voice lower now. But I think you already are. She nodded. You think this is the first time I've been punished for doing the right thing? At least this time I know someone's paying attention. He chuckled again, but softer. That nurse fire still burns, huh? Turns out it never left, she said. They just stopped giving me a place to use it. They sat in stillness again. The kind that carried weight. Neither of them needed to fill it. It was the kind of quiet that happens after decisions are made, without words. The kind that comes before things start to shift. Shaq finally pushed to his feet. I want you to keep the envelope, he said. You'll know when to read it, and when to move. What happens if I open it too soon? She asked. You'll feel it, he said. And they'll know. She rose too, tucking the envelope into her bag. There was no handshake, no staged goodbye, just a nod between two people who didn't expect their paths to cross, and now knew they never really uncrossed. As she walked out of the lounge and back into the roar of the terminal, the crowd looked the same. Passengers, families, screens glowing with delays and destinations. But she knew everything was different now. The rules? They were off the record. and someone had already rewritten the playbook. The SUV hummed quietly as it cruised along the outskirts of the city. Tinted windows shielding its passengers from a world they were rapidly disconnecting from. Brenna sat in the back beside Shaq, the manila envelope heavy in her lap like a sealed threat. The silence between them wasn't strained, it was loaded. Not with awkwardness, but with reverence for the shift they both felt coming. Shaq hadn't said much since they left the airport lounge. The driver, an older man, with the posture of a retired Marine, spoke to no one and took back roads. Brenna didn't recognize. The GPS wasn't on. No phones were out. Shaq had already told her not to turn on her location or take any calls. Not today, he'd said, in that slow, careful tone of his that made it feel less like a warning and more like a promise. They arrived at a modest estate near the edge of a wooded slope, gated, quiet, private in the way that money buys when it's not trying to impress. The kind of place where nobody knocks unless they're expected. As they walked inside, Brenna took in the details. A grand piano that hadn't been played recently. Framed jerseys, but none mounted like trophies. No shrine to ego. No gleam of excess. Just memory and grounding. He gestured to a leather couch near the fireplace and disappeared down a hallway. She sat down, stretching her legs and watching the room come alive in pieces. There was a warmth here, a soul stitched into the walls. Not opulence, rootedness. When Shaq returned, he wasn't holding his phone or a drink. He had something else. A small square cassette player. Old school. The kind you'd find in the back of a thrift shop or buried in a family attic. He sat across from her, set the device gently on the coffee table between them, and clicked it on. Shaquille O'Neal's voice came through with the grainy texture of a decades-old recording. Warm, southern, steady as a sermon. Not rehearsed, not produced, just honest. Baby, don't ever let your voice get smaller when your name gets bigger. Brenna didn't blink. She didn't even breathe. Shaq closed his eyes. The words hit like scripture. You walk into a room, and folks'll already have a story written for you. Let 'em. Just make sure your story don't get quiet when theirs gets loud. Lucille spoke like she was still there. Like time had bent itself backward to bring her voice into this exact moment. And Brenna understood. This wasn't just nostalgia. This was foundation. This was the anchor to everything Shaq had become. Everything he was still trying to protect. He opened his eyes and leaned forward. She recorded that when I got drafted, said if I ever forgot who I was, or started believing the cameras more than her, I had to play this. Brenna nodded slowly, feeling the room shift again, not because it got darker, but because it suddenly felt full. Lucille O'Neal was gone, but somehow very much here. Shaq continued. Fame didn't scare her, but what it did to men, that terrified her. She saw it eat integrity like breakfast. Saw how it made people replace courage with contracts. He paused, then added, she also saw how fast truth gets erased when the people speaking it are too big to be ignored. He reached into a small drawer beside the couch and pulled out a second envelope. This one was more weathered, creased like it had been folded and unfolded a dozen times. No stamps, no return address, just a plain manila exterior, and one line scrawled across the front. Your silence is overdue. Brenna took it carefully, turning it over in her hands. I found that tucked under my windshield wiper after I gave that interview last month, he said. The one where I said brands are quick to kneel in press conferences but won't hire black executives or fund inner-city schools. She remembered that clip. It went viral. Not because it was controversial, because it was unfiltered. Shaq hadn't read a statement. He'd spoken from the gut, and the reaction had been complicated. I kept it quiet, he said. Didn't tell my team. Just watched. Waited. Brenna ran her fingers across the ink. It was smudged slightly, rushed, maybe even written from a car. No watermark. No logo. Just that one line. Both a warning and a verdict. You think it's from someone inside Crown Forge? She asked. Maybe. Or someone close to them. Could be a warning. Could be a threat. I've learned the line between the two is usually money. He sat back, resting one arm on the couch's backrest, gaze drifting toward a family photo on the mantel. In it he was young, maybe 23, smiling beside Lucille, who stood like a general, with her hand on his shoulder. I knew this would come when I started talking, but I thought maybe they'd go after endorsements. Maybe smear campaigns. I didn't think they'd try to take my health. Not like that. His eyes met hers. That day at the airport, that wasn't just a scare. It was a move. I felt it in my body. Something was off. And if you hadn't acted as fast as you did. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Brenna felt the words settle into her chest like a second heartbeat. Everything was sharp now. Focused. No gray areas left. You said earlier you didn't want me in this, she said. But you brought me here. You played your mother's voice. You showed me this letter. That means something. Shaq studied her for a long moment, then nodded. It means I trust you. And that's not something I hand out anymore. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, echoing his posture. So what happens next? We find out how deep this goes. Quietly. No press. No press releases. Just truth. We trace connections. We see who folds when they think no one's watching. And when the time comes, we speak. All of it. Brenna thought about everything she'd walked away from. The hospital, her career, the rules that punished her for acting on instinct. And now she was being handed something raw, unfinished, dangerous, and entirely hers to choose. You ever regret speaking out? She asked. Shaq looked back at the cassette player, then at the words scrawled on the envelope again. Every time I see someone flinch when I enter a room, he said. Every time I hear the silence that follows the truth. But then I hear her voice again. He clicked the player on once more. Lucille's voice filled the room. Don't wait for a room to ask you to speak. If they needed your silence, they never deserved your truth. Brenna stood slowly, the envelope clutched in one hand, and her old nurse's instincts burning with new purpose. She didn't know where the next step would lead. But for the first time since being fired, she wasn't walking alone, and she wasn't walking away. Not this time. Lucille's voice was still in the room, and now Brenna's voice had found its way in too. The fireplace crackled quietly in the background, casting flickers of orange light across the hardwood floor. The sun had dropped beyond the trees outside, and the estate now sat in twilight, isolated, still, and humming with unspoken tension. Brenna Colt leaned against the edge of a kitchen island, her arms crossed, eyes trained on Shaq as he stood at the far side of the room with his back to her. He was staring at a corkboard on the wall, blank, save for a single business card pinned in the center. Crown Forge Capital. It looked harmless, unassuming even. But every syllable of the name rang with menace after what she'd learned. A silent empire, hiding behind fake LLCs and philanthropic fronts, with ties so deep they reached into sports, tech, politics, and probably places Shaq hadn't even uncovered yet. They weren't interested in sponsorships. They were interested in silencing influence, or co-opting it. They made me an offer, Shaq said finally, his voice low, almost bitter. 2 months ago, quiet meeting. They sent a strategist, nice suit, no soul. He told me I had options, said I could pivot the conversation, and preserve my brand, offered me a stake in their new sports media group, if I agreed to back off. No more activism, no more community pressure, just sit back, smile and cash checks. Brenna's jaw tensed. And you refused. I laughed, he said, turning around. That's when it got serious. Calls started dropping, appearances got cancelled, media requests went stale, and then the notes started. Anonymous, veiled threats. One even mentioned Mimira by name. Brenna's breath hitched. He didn't need to say it aloud. This wasn't just business. This was intimidation. This was someone powerful, reminding him they could reach beyond the court, beyond the boardroom, into the parts of his life that couldn't be protected by money. Shaq paced slowly, that quiet storm always just beneath the surface. They're used to players complying, even the legends. The minute you speak about race, systems, the truth that sits under the contracts, they make it look like you're angry, or difficult to work with. Then they bury your voice behind a new endorsement deal, and a slick apology. He stopped, looking straight at her. But I don't apologize for truth. Not anymore. Brenna studied him, this mountain of a man who the world thought it understood. He wasn't bulletproof. He was fed up. Cornered. But not afraid. Still, something nagged at her, crawling through the adrenaline and disbelief. Why me? She asked, the question finally rising to the surface. Why bring this to me? You've got lawyers, handlers, people who've been with you for decades. Why drag a broke, blacklisted nurse into something this heavy? Shaq didn't flinch. Because you didn't look at me and see a headline. You didn't pause to check credentials. You didn't wait for permission. You helped a man who couldn't breathe. Not a millionaire. Not a celebrity. Just a human being. No cameras. No deals. That kind of empathy? He paused. It's rare, and it's dangerous to people like them. Brenna blinked. The weight of his words landed hard. Dangerous empathy. She'd never thought of it that way. But now it made sense. That's why they'd fired her. Not because she broke protocol, but because she reminded people that red tape doesn't outweigh a pulse. She exhaled, rubbing the back of her neck. You realize I'm not trained for this kind of war, right? You are, he said. You just don't wear the uniform anymore. Silence settled again, but it wasn't empty. It was a hallway between decisions. Brenna could feel her old world slipping further behind her, and the next one, the one filled with encrypted letters, corporate ghosts and powerful enemies, rising ahead. Shaq reached into a side drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside are documents I copied before the meetings ended. Holdings, shadow donors, board members who shouldn't be involved in sports at all, people tied to political backers, real estate networks, even foreign investments. The names on this list don't show up together in public, but behind the scenes, they're writing the rules. Brenna hesitated, then opened it. The pages weren't many, but they were enough. Memos, wire transfers, timestamps, notes in shorthand. It didn't look like evidence to the average eye, but Brenna had seen enough in hospital litigation to know how information gets hidden in plain sight. They're building something big, he continued. A new sports entity. Private. Closed off. Designed to control not just games, but narratives. Who gets seen? Who gets silenced? Who gets paid? Who gets erased? She flipped through the pages slowly. There was one name that stood out. Ruben Wexler, a major investor in prison tech systems. Another, Claire Halding, previously exposed in a discrimination case involving college recruitment firms, all masked behind venture firms and shell corporations. This goes way beyond you, she said. I know, he replied, but I'm the only one loud enough and unafraid enough to bring it forward. The problem is, they know that too. And now they know you helped stop me from collapsing in public, from vanishing in a story that could have been blamed on health issues. He let that hang in the air. So now I'm marked, he added. But so are you. She looked at him, the folder clutched in her hands. That was never my plan. Empathy never is, he said. It just shows up. But people like Crown Forge, they see it as a crack in the system, a flaw, and flaws get corrected. The way he said corrected made her skin crawl. Brenna shut the folder and sat down on one of the bar stools at the counter. She needed a second. Her head spun with every implication. She thought she'd just stopped a man from collapsing. Instead, she'd walked straight into a power play where people with no names held more control than she could have imagined. She looked up at Shaq, her voice steady now. So what exactly are we doing? His reply came without hesitation. We document everything. We protect the story. No leaks. No early moves. And when the timing's right, we speak. Not with lawyers. With proof. And with people who still believe in doing the right thing even when it hurts. And if they come for us before that, Shaq gave a small, measured smile. Then we'll remind them what happens when people stop being afraid. Brenna looked down at her hands. Same hands that had stopped a cardiac event. Same hands that were now part of a fight far outside an ER. Empathy was a liability. But it was also her weapon. And for the first time since being fired, she felt like it mattered again. Maybe too much. Maybe just enough. The rain had started softly. Just enough to slick the windshield. Not enough to draw suspicion. The SUV cruised steadily down the rural bypass. Shaq's driver claimed was the cleanest route to avoid cameras and chatter. Brenna didn't argue. She was too focused on the shadows outside, the tree lines that blurred into streaks of charcoal as the sky dimmed. The city had disappeared behind them like a snapped tether, and ahead there was only the hush of empty roads. She checked the dashboard clock. 7:12 p.m. Their phones were off, their GPS dark, their names not on any travel log. Safehouse protocol. Shaq insisted. Trust isn't what it used to be. The driver, Deacon, hadn't said more than 10 words since they left the estate, and she got the feeling that was intentional. Brenna sat in the back seat, hands folded in her lap, the manila folder now zipped in the inner lining of her coat. Every bump in the road felt sharper than it should have. Every passing car, or lack thereof, carried a new question. She wasn't paranoid by nature. She'd spent years reading vitals, not vibes, but something tonight felt off. Too clean. Too planned. Then, just past a bend near a wooded curve, the road ahead vanished behind a wall of metal. A semi-truck. jackknifed across both lanes. No hazards, no flares, no driver in sight. Deacon slammed the brakes hard, tires skidding just short of impact. The SUV rocked forward violently before stopping a breath from the wreck. Shaq reached across Brenna instinctively, arm braced, not panicked but alert, too calm, too precise, like he'd expected this, or worse, recognized it. No one spoke. Brenna's heart thudded in her ears as she scanned the scene. There were no blinking lights, no steam, no sirens, no oil slick on the road. Just a motionless wall of steel and silence under the bruised sky. "Stay inside," Deacon said, low but firm. He opened his door slowly and stepped out, phone still in his pocket, not touching the radio, not calling anyone. That silence, that choice spoke volumes. Brenna turned to Shaq. "What is this?" He didn't answer immediately. Just stared straight ahead, eyes narrowed at the truck like it was an old memory. "It's not an accident," he said finally. "It's choreography." She blinked. "You think this was staged?" "I know it was." His tone never rose. "The message isn't we're coming. The message is we could've." Brenna's mouth went dry. "There's no one around. That's the point." She leaned forward, catching sight of a white SUV parked off-road, in the tree line, far enough to look like nothing, close enough to be everything. Its windows were dark. Its engine wasn't running. But she could feel eyes on them, not curiosity, calculation. Deacon returned and opened Shaq's door slightly. No driver, no plates, no footprints. This wasn't a breakdown. "Then we go around," Shaq said. "There's no space," Deacon replied. "We'll have to backtrack." Shaq nodded once. "Do it. Now." Deacon climbed back in and eased the vehicle into a tight reverse turn, tires crunching slowly over gravel as they spun away from the jackknife and back toward the bend they'd just taken. As they rounded the corner again, Brenna watched the truck disappear from view. Still no movement. Still no sirens. It would sit there all night if it needed to, and no one would question it. Not in this part of the state. Not on a road nobody was supposed to be on. "I don't understand," she said. "Why do all this? Why not just hit us if they wanted to?" Shaq looked at her, finally, with an intensity that wasn't fear. It was experience. "Because fear works better than blood. If they hit me, I become a headline, a martyr. But if they make me hesitate, make me pull back, watch my back, question every shadow, that's more effective. Long-term damage, quiet control." Brenna leaned against the headrest, pulse racing. "And what about me? I'm not a threat. I'm not famous." Shaq didn't blink. "You are now, not because of who you are, but because you didn't freeze. Because you moved when others didn't. They don't care who you are. They care what you did." The SUV picked up speed, moving off the bypass and onto a smaller service road. Deacon took them down a narrow two-lane stretch Brenna had never seen, bordered by trees too thick to peer through. Her thoughts spiraled. Everything she'd touched in the last 24 hours, suddenly connected to something wider, darker. She'd left a career because she did what was right. Now she was being followed for the same reason. And somewhere behind them, on a road without witnesses, a truck would sit until another signal was needed. "They know we're moving," she whispered. Shaq nodded. "And now they know we know." The rest of the drive was quiet, not because they had nothing left to say, but because they were entering the part of the story where every word had weight, where silence wasn't safety, it was strategy. The safe house was more farmhouse than fortress, tucked behind acres of Georgia pine, with no visible road signs, no digital footprint, and no neighbors within earshot. The kind of place designed for people who needed to vanish without disappearing. Brenna stepped inside just after dusk, eyes adjusting to the soft amber glow spilling from antique sconces along the walls. Everything was deliberately modest: faded rugs, hand-me-down furniture, books stacked unevenly beside leather armchairs. It was a house that didn't want to be noticed, but it held memories, the kind you could feel even before you saw them. Shaq gave her a short tour: kitchen, office, spare bedrooms. The place had the bones of somewhere lived in, not owned. She followed him past a hallway filled with photos, mostly family shots, the kind that weren't for Instagram, but for Sunday mornings and quiet afternoons. One stood out: a younger Shaq with a girl beside him, grinning wide, her face full of spark and something fiercer. His daughter Miara. Brenna lingered near the image longer than she meant to, but Shaq didn't interrupt. He just waited quietly, until she turned to follow again. They passed a sunroom at the rear of the house, where a few scattered toys sat like remnants of a life paused. That's when she saw it under the edge of a weathered couch, a single white sneaker, worn at the heel, a scuffed purple lace dangling loose. Something about it felt wrong, not wrong like dangerous, wrong like personal. She crouched, pulled it out gently, and found the tongue lifted just enough to reveal something tucked inside. A folded square of paper. She glanced at Shaq, who was already watching her with narrowed eyes. "You didn't put this there," she said. "No," he said. "I haven't seen that shoe since the last time Mira stayed here. 2 months ago." Brenna unfolded the paper slowly. It wasn't a child's scrawl. It was deliberate, mature, almost restrained, like it had been written in one sitting by someone trying not to panic. "Dad, if they get to you, tell the truth anyway. The Crown Forge deal isn't just about money. It's about burying names. I know what I heard. They didn't know I was listening." Brenna froze. She read it again. And again. Shaq walked forward, gently took the note from her hand, and sat on the armrest of the couch. He stared at the handwriting like it was something sacred and dangerous all at once. "She's smart," he said finally. "Scary smart. Keeps things to herself more than she should. But this, I didn't know she knew anything." Brenna's voice stayed low. She heard something she wasn't supposed to, and she knew it mattered enough to hide it. "That's not just smart. That's terrifying." Shaq nodded, jaw tightening. "She's been spending more time at my business meetings. Wants to learn. Thought she was just curious about the brand deals. But now..." He stopped. The unspoken reality pressed in. Mira, a teenager still forming her own life, had already been pulled into the shadow of something most adults wouldn't dare touch. And she had been brave enough to speak, if only on paper. Brenna sat across from him, her voice sharpened. "This isn't just sabotage, Shaq. This is a cleanup operation. Something already happened. This isn't about stopping you from talking. It's about making sure no one ever uncovers what already went down." Shaq didn't respond immediately. He just stood and moved to the office at the far end of the hall. She followed. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with a vintage lamp casting soft light over a cluttered desk. Papers, thumb drives, and legal pads filled with notes in Shaq's distinct handwriting. Brenna moved toward one, scanning shorthand phrases that read like pieces of a riddle. Player funder went silent. 317. Vexler off books loan. Me overheard convo verify. She looked up. "You were already close to this." "I was trying to map it out," Shaq admitted. "Crown Forge is the face, but there's more. A network beneath it. Recruitment programs. Medical test labs. Contract manipulation. Young athletes, especially black ones, signed early, squeezed later. Some disappeared off radar completely, and nobody talks." Brenna felt the chill ripple through her spine. "You think they were harmed?" "I think silence has a price," he said. "And I think some of those names Nyara mentioned weren't just forgotten. They were erased." She turned back to the desk. Her hands moved across one page, stopping at a name highlighted in red. Travis Kendricks, age 23, former D1 athlete, disappeared mid-season. Contract terminated quietly. No news coverage. No social media since the date of exit. "You have the story," she said softly, turning to face him. "You've been building it all this time. Notes, names, timelines. It's all here, but it's scattered, covered in whispers." He stepped toward her. "And now you've seen it. All of it." She met his gaze directly. "You have the story. I have the voice. Let's give them neither silence nor control." For the first time that day, something shifted in his eyes. Not relief, not triumph, resolve. The kind you only get when you realize you're no longer standing alone. "We leak this now. They shut it down," he said. "Discredit us, spin it, bury it under noise." "I know," she replied. "But if we don't, we lose the chance to build it right." She pulled out her phone, not to call but to open the recorder app. "I want you to say it. All of it. The timeline, the names, the threat, everything. Not for press, not for ratings. Just truth. Your voice. In your words." He hesitated, then nodded. She pressed record. Shaq took a breath. "My name is Shaquille O'Neal. And if you're hearing this, it means the story is no longer just mine." Brenna leaned back as his voice filled the room. Not the one from commercials or arenas, but the one born of fire shaped by Lucille's truth. sharpened by loss, and now, armed with proof. And on the table between them, the sneaker sat empty now, but no less important. A reminder that courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's tucked in canvas and laces, waiting for the right hands to find it. The room Brenna chose was intentionally bare, an unused sound studio at the back of an old church, donated years ago for community youth projects that never got off the ground. A single desk lamp lit the space, casting long shadows on the walls padded with aging foam panels. No windows, no echoes, no risk of being overheard. Shaq had dropped her off at a side entrance and waited outside, giving her the kind of space only someone who truly trusted her would allow. She hadn't said what she was about to do, not in full, but he understood. The silence between them had been a green light. She sat down at the mic, heart steady now. Her hands didn't tremble like they had in the hospital boardroom, or at the airport, or even when she found the sneaker. Because this was different. It was action, not reaction. The recorder clicked on, and for the first few seconds she just breathed. Then she spoke. There was a man, she began, keeping her tone even, controlled. He was sitting near gate 47, at Hartsfield-Jackson, breathing wrong. No one moved. I did. I didn't know his name. I didn't care who he was. I just knew something was wrong. She kept the details raw, but vague. No names, no locations besides the airport. No mention of Shaq, no tie to any corporation. But what she did say was unmistakably real. I found out later the man I helped was a target. Not for robbery, not for violence, for silence. Because he knew something. Something powerful people didn't want said. She laid it out, the collapse, the message on the envelope, the hidden networks beneath sports franchises, the manipulation of rising athletes, and the quiet erasure of those who asked the wrong questions. She told it like a story, not a whistleblower's statement. Human first, investigative second. A nurse, a man, a moment where empathy became danger. By the time she finished, the file was 27 minutes long. 27 minutes of clean audio, recorded without emotion, but not without weight. It wasn't a rant. It wasn't a scream. It was calm. That made it lethal. She uploaded the file from a burner laptop, running it through a triple VPN routed across 3 continents. The hosting site was anonymous, encrypted, built for whistleblower protection. She added one sentence in the description. If you know, you know. If you don't, start asking. Then she clicked publish. It took 12 minutes to go viral. The file was posted on a small watchdog journalism forum. Then it hit Reddit, then Twitter, then Instagram. Reels broke it into soundbites. Empathy became danger. They weren't after money. They were burying names. The nurse didn't ask who he was. She just saved him. Hashtags ignited like wildfire. Jeet 47, the nurse, Big Candy Brave. And somewhere in a West Coast production studio, hours behind Atlanta time, but wide awake thanks to the explosion online, Shaquille O'Neal sat before a camera, no stage, no teleprompter, just a single lens and his own voice. He didn't flinch when the red light turned on. He didn't blink. He just spoke. I've been quiet too long, and now I've got nothing left to lose. The statement was barely 3 minutes long. But it didn't need to be longer. He confirmed the broadcast's core truths, without repeating the recording's details. He didn't name names. He didn't frame it as a conspiracy. He just talked about patterns, about power, and about what it means when people are punished for speaking out while others are rewarded for staying silent. I've seen athletes recruited for contracts and disappear when they ask the wrong questions. I've been in rooms where truth was the only thing not for sale. And I've seen empathy treated like a threat. He paused, letting that last sentence breathe. I won't confirm who the nurse was. She didn't ask for this. She never even asked for thanks. But she reminded me what courage looks like when it doesn't need a spotlight. And now, the story is out, and no one's walking it back. He stood up as the camera kept rolling, walking off frame. No music, no outro, just the truth left hanging in the digital air. By morning, the internet had moved beyond hashtags. Cable news stations picked it up. Talk shows played the broadcast audio over still images of airports and anonymous figures. Even late-night hosts, usually allergic to serious tones, broke from comedy to acknowledge it. Crown Forge scrambled. Their PR team issued a vague statement, denying all rumors and baseless online allegations, and within hours the internet responded with a counter-statement. "We're not asking anymore." Protest signs emerged in Atlanta, Chicago, and Philadelphia. Hand-painted, messy, loud. Big can be brave. They buried the names, will dig, protect the nurse, expose the forge, and the most haunting of them all, if you're quiet, you're next. Crown Forge board members began quietly scrubbing social media, removing LinkedIn connections, disappearing from corporate panels. But it was too late. The story had become self-sustaining. It wasn't a leak anymore. It was a flood. Back at the safe house, Brenna watched the ripple unfold from the couch, laptop open on her knees, eyes darting across timelines, comments, and news tickers. She hadn't slept, but she didn't feel tired. She felt lit from within, scared, yes, but clear. Shaq walked into the room, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. He didn't say much, just set the coffee beside her, leaned over, and tapped the screen. His own post was up now, a single quote. "We're not brave because we're fearless. We're brave because we move anyway." Brenna looked up at him. "They know it's you." "They always knew," he said. "But now the public knows too, and I'm not alone anymore." She nodded, letting her gaze return to the screen, where stories kept multiplying, where people were connecting the dots she hadn't even known existed. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time the silence had cracked, and the echo of truth was louder than anyone expected. The rhythm of Hartsfield-Jackson hadn't changed, still a sea of voices rolling luggage wheels, and coffee cups clinking against counter edges. But as Brenna Colt stepped through the automatic doors into the terminal, something felt undeniably different, not in the way the air smelled, or how the escalators hummed, but in how the place responded to her presence. A TSA agent near the security line caught her eye, and gave a soft nod, a recognition without intrusion. Moments later, a little girl walking with her mother waved, her hand too fast for Brenna to react before the child disappeared into the next terminal. Weeks had passed since the broadcast that shattered everything. Since the recording Brenna made anonymously circled the world in hours. Since Shaquille O'Neal stood up on camera and refused to sit down ever again. What had started with a life saved at Gate 47 had grown into something bigger, too big to silence, too real to deny. As Brenna made her way through the concourse, she paused near the very gate where it all began. Gate 47 wasn't empty today. It bustled with life just like before. But mounted on the digital wall above it, now was a full-length display screen, cycling through rotating messages of courage and visibility. There, stylized in warm tones and brushstroke art, were the images Shaq, hand extended, not dunking, not flexing, but offering. Beside him, Brenna crouched beside a faceless figure, head bowed in mid-action, administering aid. Above them, in bold white lettering, it read, "Some heroes don't dunk. They step in." She stared at it longer than she meant to. It was surreal, seeing herself cast not as a bystander, not as the disgraced nurse the hospital tried to erase, but as a part of something that reshaped the conversation. Not about fame, not about scandal, but about instinct, the decision to move when no one else would. As she turned to head toward the gate for her flight, a man in a crisp blazer stepped out of a nearby store, recognized her, and tipped his head in a quiet salute. No words, just understanding. It was the kind of recognition she hadn't sought, but now carried like a quiet badge, not of fame, but of change. Shaq had told her it would ripple. He'd said it from the porch of the safe house the day after the broadcast went global. His voice steady as he scrolled through headlines. "They're calling us folk heroes," he'd murmured, half smirking. "You believe that?" Brenna hadn't. Not then. But now there was the Colt Fund, named without her approval. Shaq had only told her once. It was already done. A non-profit foundation seeded by his own capital and fueled by public support, designed to protect and fund whistleblowers, nurses and first responders who acted when systems froze. Those who moved without waiting for orders, who spoke truth when policy said stay quiet. Applications poured in within hours of the announcement. EMTs blackballed for refusing to ignore patients without insurance. Junior nurses punished for treating undocumented migrants. Teachers suspended for protecting students. The forgotten guardians of every broken system had finally been given a name, a space, and a voice. Brenna stood now at her gate, flight boarding in 20 minutes, but her mind was already airborne. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. This trip wasn't exile. It was invitation. She was headed to the Colt Fund's first roundtable conference in D.C., where organizers and allies would draft the next steps legislation. training protocols, institutional watchdogs. She wasn't just a guest. She was the keynote speaker. It still felt strange. She'd written the speech in pieces, mostly between cups of black coffee and quiet sunrises. But she kept circling back to the same idea, that it wasn't about being brave in the big moments. It was about refusing to hesitate in the small ones. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Shaq. They just installed a plaque outside the lounge. Gate 47. Let this be the place where silence broke. Thought you'd want to know. She didn't reply right away. She just stared at the message, feeling the weight of it press into her chest. Not heavy, but grounding. So much had started in that terminal. Not just a collapse. Not just a rescue, but a reckoning. And in the space where everyone else assumed nothing was wrong, one stranger had acted. That was enough to change the game. A voice called her boarding group. She rose slowly, taking one last look around before stepping forward. People weren't pointing, they weren't swarming, but they saw her, and more importantly, they remembered what she'd done, even if they didn't know her name. At the jet bridge, she caught one more glimpse of the rotating screen above gate. Shaq's image faded into hers, then into a new slide altogether. Just white text on black. She didn't save a celebrity. She saved a man, and in return helped the world hear him. Brenna smiled. And for the first time in a long time, she stepped forward not as the nurse who was fired, not as the woman who stumbled into something bigger than herself, but as the stranger who didn't wait to be told it mattered. Because she already knew it did. If this story made you pause, question, or feel something deeper, don't let it end here. Stay alert to the quiet heroes around you. Ask the hard questions no one's asking. And when the moment comes to move, don't wait for permission. Because the next Gate 47 could be yours.